This is a short clip from the Dad Time Podcast, Season 1, Episode 5. I talk with Doug French from the Dad 2.0 Summit, and we talk about the image of dads in the media and also about how shared parenting is becoming more accepted.
One of the great litmus tests of what's happening with dads in the 7 years since we've been doing this, I think, is that when we first started, one of the big issues that was plaguing fatherhood was the way fathers were portrayed in the media. We saw lots of portrayals of dads as kind of disinterested and inept and whatever else, and we had the opportunity to address that to the point where you don't really see much of that anymore. And if you do, there's enough of a discussion about it and a backlash, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's not. It's usually not all that vituperative, but the fact is,
Right.
it's brands recognize that that's just not the way to get to relate to your audience anymore.
Yeah, I call that the Al Bundy era, right? I mean, dad's just incompetent, he's lazy, he's just going to come home and sit on the couch. And I mean, it's just, when I was growing up, that was just so prevalent in, every sitcom and every commercial. And I agree with you. I think we're seeing a lot less of that today, but it's still out there and people still don't believe that it's a thing.
Well, there's always more work to do. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, part of my job is I just get to spend all day reading sometimes, and
Hmm.
I look at stories about fathers that come across my desk. I mean, I must see 3 or 4 dozen a day. Uh, and it used to be about 8 out of 10 was just horrible. The stories
Yeah.
of parents and children, and just horrendous stories about what had happened to them. And I think those stories are disproportionately reported on because they are outlandish, and there's a layer to it that gets it's clickbait. People kind of
Right.
click on these extraordinary stories when there's a whole bunch of us ordinary dads who, even if we're not stay-at-home dads, we're still grappling with work and life interaction and integration, and trying to be as engaged as we can, plus keep our careers going, and basically get ushered into the world that women have been enduring for decades.
Sure.
And but at the same time, it's you see that level of dad is much more prevalent than people might think. And so I like to use our Twitter feed, for example, to try and counteract all the clickbait, and recognize that there's still lots of clickbait about dads doing fantastic things like
Right.
building things and creating things, and um, becoming just really engaged caregivers. And it used to be, it seems kind of counterintuitive for dads to argue to be taken more seriously as caregivers, because it's, if you raise the bar, then you're held to a higher standard. But the fact
Hmm.
is that that's what we want. I mean, it's no longer cool to say, dad was babysitting and nobody
Right.
died, so he's a genius. let's
Yeah.
let's hold ourselves to a higher standard and recognize that dads know what they're doing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean we're a parent too, and we're born with instincts, and we certainly do things differently than mothers, and I think that's is one really interesting part of childhood development. I talked to somebody on the podcast, a couple of weeks ago, and the thing we pointed out was that when somebody's teaching a baby to swim, the dads will kind of hold the baby out in front and let it see the environment it's swimming into, where moms tend to protect and swim in front of the baby. So I think there's just ways that we do things differently, but I think you need both sides of that equation to raise healthy children.
Oh yeah, and that's there's a lot of great academic data now that are supporting that, because what you talk about, the whole idea of quote rough play that dads are more likely to engage in. Um, and there's so much more out there about the gift of failure. Jess Leahy's great book about how it's important to kind of crash the helicopter. You can't just you have to let your kids fail and learn how to pick themselves up. And
Right.
we're seeing a lot more evidence that a father's um, specific touch. I mean, he's not detached, but he's perhaps less attached than the mom. When if you give birth to a child, there's a certain level extra protection that maybe a mom brings into the equation. And much has been made about attachment parenting and how that needs to be. That's that the evaluation of that over the years has evolved. And so the whole idea of how a dad might bring a different viewpoint, that's actually a great counterpoint to what the mom brings. And again, these are all stereotypes that obviously are different with every couple. I mean, you'll find
Sure.
quite the reverse in some couples. So
Hmm.
this is not to say that all women are protective, worry warts, and all dads are evil Knievel. But I mean, there's just that there are data that say that for the most part that's the way the majority works. Again, to the extent that's worth anything.
Well, and the information, and the studies that I've read on shared parenting, which some of these studies now are over 20 years old. So this data is not new, and it really acknowledges how, both parents need to be in the equation, and showing a child that there's more than one way to live a life is actually healthy for them and allows them to become their own individual and allows them to make choices, better when as they're growing up, and when they grow up they can choose how they want to live. So having that blend, I think, is definitely important for our kids.
Yeah, the data might not be new, but the appreciation for it is.
Right.
And that's an important development as well, because now, and it's well, the great thing too is that when I used to explain to people what I did for a living 6 years ago, people were kind of not sure what that was. I would have to spend a lot more time explaining things,
Hmm.
and I think there's just a greater appreciation for that now because you read so much more about it, you see so much more about it in pop culture.
Thanks for listening to this short clip of the Dad Time podcast. If you'd like to listen to the full episode, please head over to our website at www.dadtimepodcast.com.